questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat box and we'll try to address as many as we can in the Q&A session at the end. Larissa is a client development consultant at Thomas International, South Africa. Larissa is a registered intern industrial psychologist with a passion for people development and supporting organizations. Larissa has experience working with management, teams, and professionals with a strong emphasis on empowerment and growth. Larissa has worked for Thomas International for almost 4 years and is passionate about psychometrics as well as its contribution to the individual and organizational success. Larissa has completed her honors degree in industrial psychology cum laude and holds a second honors degree in counseling psychology. Now, without further ado, let me hand over to Larissa.
Thank you, Candice, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to your first session of your Thomas recruitment journey. I hope you're all doing well, keeping safe, and ready for our session today. Today's topic is the general recruitment overview and is the first part of our series of webinars that have been designed to look at recruitment specifically. So let's have a look at the key learning objectives we hope to take away from the session today. Okay, so the first learning objective is how to attract the right candidate. So we're going to explore what are the type of methods and things that you need to think about in terms of attracting the right candidate. Then we're going to look at creating the best candidate experience, understanding how knowledge of candidates' behavior, personality, and cognitive abilities enhances the recruitment process, defining the position and creating best person to job fit, selecting assessments and identifying when to assess, and lastly, understanding how to retain your talent and identifying potential. Okay, so that is what we hope to achieve today. The agenda for today is the recruitment process, so we'll start with that first. Then we'll look at attracting talent, the candidate experience, using psychometrics in recruitment, person to job fit, and retaining your talent. Okay, let's get started. So we have the recruitment process first that we're going to cover. So this is just some interesting information that we collected from a survey done by Professional Sourcing in South Africa. These are the trends that they identified. So I want you all to keep this information in the back of your minds as we go through the session and think of how you and your organization manage your recruitment strategy and processes and ways that you can improve it, adjust it, and take it to the next level. Okay, so 93% of organizations believe that artificial intelligence, or AI, will play an important role in the recruitment process within the next few years. And we've seen this with the fourth industrial revolution upon us, and gamification, and just the way that assessments and recruitment has evolved, especially now in 2020. 59% of businesses view the sourcing of highly skilled talent as the most important in talent acquisition. And I'm sure all of you are aware that getting a highly skilled person and getting those correct skills that are necessary for the position is such a difficult aspect and component to source and to find within an individual because of the lack of skills in our country. 46% of organizations find a shortage of skills to be their biggest obstacle to attracting the best talent. And 87% of organizations believe employer branding impacts positively on the ability to hire suitable talent. So your brand is so important. The way that people that are looking at your organization and the way that they're applying to your organization is basically all about your brand and how you coming across to the people in the country and across the world. 80% of organizations rated diversity as being very important in the organization. 77% of organizations use social media to recruit candidates, up from 64% last year. So we can see there's a definite increase in terms of the platforms that people are using, and social media seems to be the current trend right now, and the biggest source for which people can recruit from. 42% of organizations use a recruitment management system. 71% of organizations prefer to advertise positions via job portals as opposed to print media, which scored a low 29%. So that just links back to how important technology is, how artificial intelligence is coming into play, and how technology has just evolved in terms of how we apply for jobs, and in terms of how we recruit candidates. So I want us all to look at first impressions, because that's so significant and so integral in terms of how we recruit people and the way that we judge people and the impressions that they give us and how we interpret it. So I want to ask you the question, how long on average does it take us to make a judgment about a person's trustworthiness, competence, likability, or aggressiveness? And I'm going to launch a poll. You have 4 options. Is it 0.1 second, 2 seconds, 30 seconds, or is it 5 minutes? So I want just some of your insights in terms of what you think the answer to this question is. So I've just launched the poll, so you can quickly answer for me, please. Okay, almost there. Okay, just a few more people left. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to end the polling in 10 seconds. Okay, great. All right, so I'm just gonna share the results to all of you. So 42% of you said it's 30 seconds to make an impression. Then the second one was 26% with 0.1 second. And then we have some people said 5 minutes with 19%, and then 2 seconds with 13%. So that's interesting. So most of you thought it was 30 seconds. So actually the correct answer to this question is 0.1 second. So in their study, Willis and Todora found that people make judgments about others after only 0.1 of a second, and these judgments also impacted the decisions that were made about people. So just think, another person has likely made a decision about you after only knowing you for 0.1 of a second. Or even the reverse, if it's consciously or unconsciously done, but you have likely made the assumption about someone after just a mere second. So keeping that in mind and thinking about this is how quickly we make impressions about people, it relates back to bias and how bias impacts on our decision making and the way that we engage with the people around us. So we have a tendency to make judgments about people quickly and unconsciously. Stereotypes are pervasive, socially constructed, and hard to change. We start building how we see society and our values and our beliefs from the time we are little kids. And it keeps evolving as we go through life and as we become adults. And the way that we believe, the way that we construct how we see society, all of that are things that tend to be a bit difficult to change. And then the way that bias impacts on our decisions is also impacting on how we behave and how we come across the people around us. So we need to think about how can we minimize bias in our decision making? So if we are all susceptible to bias, what can we do to reduce the impact? And here we have some suggestions in terms of how you can actually reduce the bias. We can do it by using psychometrics, job profiling, candidate attraction, internal buy-in from the people in the organization, interviews, and by building diverse teams. So by ensuring that we've ticked all these blocks in terms of our recruitment process, we're able to contribute to reducing bias and almost also changing the way that we perceive the people around us and trying to stop that quick impression making, and that also is going to help us reduce our bias. So using more evidence-based methods, psychometric tests and assessments, hard performance metrics, that is going to help us in terms of dealing with bias. It helps with objectivity. It helps us with our benchmarking process, looking at who our high flyers are, who are the people that we need to work on developing, and using the performance metrics and using the benchmarks and using that hard information to help us through our recruitment process. It's also about reviewing the language that you use in key documents. So your interview guides, your competency frameworks, the way that you phrase your interview questions, the way that your language is coming across in terms of your job adverts, your job descriptions, all of that contributes to the way that language is represented and the way that the candidate is going to experience it. And also invest in raising the awareness of hiring managers. So educate and adequately prepare and support your hiring managers. It's so important to brief them adequately, teach them the skills that they would need to interview a candidate and get the best and most fruitful information from the candidate. And that's something that they need to be trained on, that you need to educate them on. And it's our job as professionals, as psychologists, as psychometrists, to obviously work on this and to raise that awareness. Whenever we're looking at recruitment criteria, there's always two sides to the coin. On the left column, we have your job spec, which is your qualifications, your skills, knowledge and experience, punctuality and appearance, demonstrated preparation. And that's basically everything you would find in your job spec. On the other side of the coin, we have the right column, which is all information that is hidden, which is the preferred work behaviors of the candidate, their impact on the team, their attitude, their beliefs and their values, their level of self-awareness, and their self-motivation. So all of this is hidden information. And without assessments, it's difficult for us to determine what this information is. And we call this the people spec. So our jobs as HR professionals is basically to obviously find that balance between the two specs and try to get as much information as possible with regards to each of the job spec and the person spec. And then we also have to worry about the cost of getting it wrong. In South Africa, companies pay a lot for their cost per hire, and it's a very high level. For example, given a 10% placement fee to an agency to hire, for example, a new developer at an annual salary of 300,000 Rand means a placement cost of 30,000 Rand. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. To understand what the developer actually costs and what this position is actually costing the business, we need to actually delve into the direct as well as the indirect costs that the business will incur. So we have the opportunity costs, the rehire costs, which is your agency and your advertising, the time costs, so the wasted training, the induction, the time of your talent acquisition specialist, the time of your recruitment team, lost productivity costs, and then there's the hidden costs, which is your low morale and negative PR that the organization might experience because they've now lost this candidate. So your direct costs would be more of your advertising and the agency costs, and your indirect costs would be the admin, the talent acquisition, and obviously the opportunity cost relates back to not having a person in the position. So while there's nobody in place to create value, you're losing money. Or just the cost of the company of a bad hire, which can be challenging to rectify. And it could damage the morale of the team. It could put more pressure on the manager. It could just put pressure on the organization as a whole. And another important aspect to think about when you're recruiting is how you manage your applications. So ensuring that you have a standardized application process helps employers to assess objectively how applicants have applied, how their ability to do the job, and whether they actually fit the position. It's also important to be prepared to actually modify your standard processes if it proves to be disadvantageous for your candidate. So sometimes we do have to make allowances, we do have to make adjustments for the way that we're managing our process, just in order to accommodate certain candidates. And in most cases, we need to be very comfortable with that change and that those allowances, and make sure that it's done with ease. And the candidate also feels comfortable throughout the entire process. Application forms have been found to be a lot more easier to manage instead of having numerous amounts of CVs handed to you. Employers may reduce the risk of discrimination if they treat personal information separately from the rest of the application and restrict access to the information. It just allows for more objectivity and less bias in the decision-making process. Use objective criteria for shortlisting purposes. So benchmarking the position also helps in this regard, and monitor equality and diversity. And then the other thing that we can do in our recruitment process is ask those killer questions. So everyone should have a few unusual interview questions that get under the surface of the candidate and force your candidate to go off script and tell you if you'll be a good fit for your business or not. It can be tough to get to know a candidate if you're interviewing, especially when you're asking them the same tried and tested and tied questions, and they're just giving you those standard rehearsed answers. So some examples of some killer questions would be, what have you learned most from your current role or in the position that you're in now? How much of time do you invest in your personal development? When was the last time you took a risk and what did you learn from it? What was your greatest contribution to your current job or your organization? So ask those different questions. Ask those questions that's off topic and that really gets into what's underneath and understanding the candidate better and just getting to know them on a different level. And then we have the post-interview follow-up. So this is an important one because candidates are always nervous and they're always anxious about what to expect after the interview. So make sure that your timings are good and that there's not too much of a lag from the time that the candidate has the interview to the time that they actually get a call back from you. Make sure that your offer is well constructed, be open to questions, keep in touch with the candidate, make sure that there's open communication and there's consistent feedback. Also, the treatment of your unsuccessful candidates is so important. It impacts on your branding so much and how the organization is viewed. And also record keeping. It's so important to keep a record of candidates that you have interviewed, candidates that you have assessed, and that have good potential and good talent. So keep records of them because you never know when you might need those candidates again in the future. And perfecting how to reject candidates. So it's important to let the candidate know as soon as possible in the process if they haven't made the cut. If they have made it to final interviews, a phone call is always the best instead of just a generic email. Thank them for their time and effort. Keep it brief and professional. Keep any feedback constructive and personalize the communication. That is so important. LinkedIn and social media are full of horror stories about how badly candidates are treated by companies, and it is hugely damaging on your brand. So by keeping and doing all of these things, we're able to protect the brand, protect the organization, and obviously let candidates know and let the public know that we put time and effort into our recruitment process. Now let's look at how do you attract talent and how do you get the best talent? So how do you define talent? The Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, the CIPD, their organization in the UK, they actually did a study on, does your organization have a definition of talent in your organizational or your people strategy? And that's something that I want you all to think about. Think of your people strategy. Think about your organizational strategy. Do you actually have a definition of talent? Does it exist? Because most organizations do not have a formal definition of talent. So how do we actually identify future leaders? If we look at the CIPD results, we can see that 42% said that we don't have a formal definition of talent, but we agree on what we mean by it. And then 28% said that, no, we don't have a formal definition of talent. And 9% said that, not applicable, we don't have a people strategy. So that is concerning. And that is something that we need to think about in South Africa and within our own organizations. Do we have a definition of talent? How do we look for future leaders? How do we look at potential? And how do we manage the talent in our industry and our organizations? So what is talent? Talent can be defined as the ability to deliver outstanding results and outperform peers at a similar level or in a similar specialism. So it's somebody who has the ability to exceed, who has this natural ability to exceed. And it's something that we need to look for and identify as practitioners. But then we also need to look at potential. We need to be able to find the balance and that shift that's now happening and shift the focus to also look at potential and what we as an organization need to do to harness and identify the potential within our candidates and enable their success. So if we look at the definition of potential, it is the capacity for success in a clearly defined area. And as I mentioned, we need to challenge that notion of just looking for talent and now shift to more, let's look at talent and potential. So every organization needs to be able to hire staff who are able, motivated, talented, and have potential. Everybody has a latent possibility of becoming an even better version of themselves and are able to maximize or optimize their talent for themselves and the organization. So someone who's willing to go above and beyond for the organization, not only because it's developing themselves, but it's growing the business and it's developing the business along with them. And it's important to note that academic performance is not a brilliant predictor of workplace success. Personality measurement is actually a key predictor of future potential and can identify how likely people are to succeed at different jobs and different career paths. So that's something important that I want you to keep in mind as we go through the session. And now we're going to look at the candidate experience. So how does the candidate experience your recruitment process? And it's all about the candidate attraction. So when recruiting, your job advert is your first chance to attract talented individuals to your roles. This is also the first impression that candidates will get of your business, and you know what they say about first impressions. So they are lasting, and minority groups are less likely to apply to the position if they feel the organization is just not for them. So advertising for your role. So with 1 in 5 job hunters revealing that they would be put off applying to a role with an unclear job description, it's vital that you get it right. Spending time and effort on your initial posting can be extremely beneficial, saving you time and money in the long run. Getting it wrong, and you could end up with a string of irrelevant applications, or worse, none at all. So while it might be tempting to get creative when advertising your jobs, you should always follow a basic format. In fact, getting the structure right is an important step towards writing a strong job advert. This will ensure that you have a clear layout and only include the most relevant information. Your hiring process starts with your job advert, and you risk damaging your brand and if you don't get it right. Taking the time to perfect your job advert from the start can be hugely beneficial, saving you money and resources, not to mention the fact that it can boost your application rates. So follow a simple structure, make sure you include the relevant information. It also allows candidates to decide quickly if they're interested in the position or not. And by using multiple sources of social media, you are able to target a vast pool of candidates, which also in turn boosts the diversity and spectrum of candidates you're attracting. So using LinkedIn, Careers24, PNet, Facebook, Instagram, there's so much more to choose from these days, and people are accessible on so many different platforms. It's just about choosing which platform works for your business. Now we're going to talk about using psychometrics in recruitment. And why should we use psychometrics in recruitment? Well, as we discussed before, it can assist with reducing bias, and it assists with any negative legislative impacts that could occur by increasing objectivity. So increase employer retention, so ensure that the right candidate is in the right position, which then assists in retaining the talent. It is a very competitive environment right now, and attracting the right people with the desired skill set is tough. Reduces the cost of getting it wrong, so saves the business money, especially long-term cost saving. Enhances your reputation as an aspirational company to work for. So the company then becomes a desirable place of employment to more and more people. Provides insights to behaviors and abilities that cannot be ascertained in other ways. So it gives you an in-depth understanding of who the candidate is and what you might have missed in the CVs and in the interview process. If we look at the Iceberg Theory, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, there's no better way to just demonstrate this with your the things that we can see above the water and everything that's underneath the water. So the things that we can see is the behavior of the candidate or the individual. Everything that we can't see is hidden, which is the personality, values, beliefs, genetics, and all the things that basically make up an individual. Those are the things that we can't see. And all of this, the behavior and what's hidden, that is what the psychometrics can basically provide us with. So at Thomas International, we have different assessments that we use to basically look through the layers and unfold and try to get to know the person a little bit more on an in-depth basis. So for example, we would start off with the PPA, which is the personal profile analysis. And here we're looking at DISC. So it's dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. With this, what we're trying to identify is, are we looking for someone who is direct, assertive, forceful, inquisitive? Is it somebody who is results driven and doesn't like failure? Or do we want somebody for the position that is a little bit more higher on influence? So somebody who's communicative, verbal, persuasive, and friendly. So someone who basically needs to work with and through people. Or are we looking for a candidate who might be a bit more higher on steadiness? So someone who's more methodical, persistent, deliberate, thorough, and who's a good listener, and who provides the stability, service, and support to the business. Or you can be looking for somebody who you might need to be higher in compliance. So does this person need to be more careful, logical, precise, detail-orientated? So basically somebody who brings the technical quality aspect to the business. So we do the PPA to identify what we're looking for, or do we want a combination of the different factors within DISC. Then we look at the next layer of the candidate, which is the emotional intelligence in their personality. And with this one, we use the trait emotional intelligence assessment. So with this assessment, we're looking at the well-being, self-control, emotionality, sociability, adaptability, and self-motivation of the candidate. So for example, the well-being factor will tell us, how confident is this person? Do they look for future opportunities? Do they look at the advantages and the disadvantages of the situation when they're problem solving? Or we can look at the self-control. Are they impulsive? Do they make rash decisions? Are they in control of their internal feelings? Do they manage their stress well? So all of those components form part of self-control. Then we look at the emotionality factor. So are they empathetic? Are they able to pick up on other people's emotions? How do they build relationships? How do they express their emotions? Do they bottle their feelings, or do they express quite comfortably? Then we look at sociability. And sociability tells us about how assertive is this person? Are they comfortable to stand up for themselves? Can they manage other people's emotions? So can they inspire people? Can they motivate people? Are they comfortable in an unfamiliar social situation? So would they do well in a meeting with people they've never met before? And how comfortable are they with that interaction? And then we have adaptability, which tells us all about how does this person deal with change? Can they adapt to a very fast changing environment with lots of moving elements? And how comfortable are they to deal with change? And then we have self-motivation, which gives us an insight into, is this person intrinsically or extrinsically motivated? So do I need to push them with incentives and rewards? Or do I need to just let them be and they push themselves on their own and they find their own internal drive to do what they need to do? So everybody's motivated in a different way. And the emotional intelligence assessment provides us with all of this information and delves into the personality of the candidate. And then the next layer that we peel off and we delve into is a general intelligence assessment, which is our aptitude test. And that tells us all about the capabilities in terms of, can this person think on their feet? How adaptable are they to change? Can they actually cope with the mental demands of the position that they are being recruited for? Could they be a high flyer? Is this person an effective problem solver? And to what extent can we develop this person through training? So if I have to look at this candidate and if I have to put them into training, how quickly would they pick up that training? And with this assessment, we look at the 5 different factors, which is reasoning, perceptual speed, number speed and accuracy, word meaning, and spatial visualization. And then we look at the position and look at which factors are most relevant to the position and where would I want this candidate to score quite well in. And then we look at the next layer, which is potential. And we're able to identify this through the high potential trait indicator, which is our HPTI. And we're looking at 6 different personality traits with this assessment: conscientiousness, adjustment, curiosity, risk approach, ambiguity acceptance, and competitiveness. So with this tool, what we're trying to discover about the candidate is, what do I need to coach them and develop them on in order to become a successful leader? So where do I need to develop? Where do I need to pay a little bit more attention to get this person to be performing in an optimal, on an optimal level? So are they self-motivated? How do they react to stress? Are they self-disciplined? How innovative are they? Are they curious, or do they prefer tried and tested methods? And then how do they handle risk? Are they open to dealing with risk? Can they handle conflict and challenging situations and conversations, or do they tend to avoid it? And how do they deal with uncertainty or not having a clear-cut solution to a problem? Are they comfortable with it, or do they prefer a little bit more structure and stability in their job? And then we have competitiveness, which tells us, do they prefer to be more collaborative and they're not really focused on the recognition and winning? Or are they people who like to be in that position where they can influence the win and they are the person in charge of getting the team to achieve the goal that they've set out to? So that is all the types of information that we get from the different assessments. And all of that combined basically gives us the ideal candidate and what we're looking for, combining the experience, the qualifications, the references, everything else that goes into the recruitment process. Along with the other psychometric assessments that we've done, we do job profiling. So it's looking at person to job fit. So when we do job profiling, people hire in their own image or hire clones of current success. So people have a tendency to do that. By creating a well-defined job profile, it reduces bias and it creates more transparency in the process. And it's also linked to higher productivity and greater innovation and lower turnover. It's a data-led decision. So with the PPA, we're able to do job profiling. And when you do a job profiling exercise, we always encourage you to include your stakeholders, the current line manager, or just as many people as possible in that process so that you get quite a diverse input in terms of what that job should look like. So now I'm going to take you through a live job profile on our Thomas system. And the position that we've decided to do today is a senior learning designer. The reason we've chosen this position is that my colleague in the later sessions in the webinar series is going to do a case study on this position. So I'm just going to look at a few of the competencies required for the position, and I want you to take note of some of them as we create the job profile. So for this position, we need good interpersonal and communication skills, ability to function effectively as a team member, coordination and planning skills, the ability to work under pressure, ability to work accurately, business acumen, results orientated, a strategic thinker, and somebody who's going to develop training material. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen for you. And here we're going to now create a job profile. So we have the senior learning designer, and we are going to use the job create function. So this is the Thomas system, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So on the system, you have different versions of how you can actually create a job profile. So today I'm just going to use the quickest one, which is job create. So with job create, you have 4 rows of words. You need to choose the word that most describes the senior learning designer and the words that are most applicable for the position. So if we look through the words, the first row is drive, competitiveness, self-esteem, assertion, directness. Then the second row, we have empathy, confidence, charm, optimism, influence, positiveness. Then on the third row, we have composure, dependability, predictability, and patience. And the last row, we have self-discipline and compliance. So if I'm thinking about the position, I'm more inclined to pick the last one because I need this individual to be quite compliant in terms of them writing training material and developing training material. So they need to follow a lot of policy and procedure. I'm going to click that one, and you'll see that the job profile is starting to get created in terms of the DISC profile. Then we have question 2. So the first one is moderation, conservative, hesitation. So I'm not very happy with that. So we'll move to the next one. Seriousness, logic, suspicion, and then we have activity, mobile, energy. So I'm leaning more towards the third option because this person needs to multitask and work on lots of things at the same time. So we choose that one. And then question number 3. We first have drive and competitive nature. Then we have moderation, then empathy, and then seriousness and logic. So for this one, I might be more inclined to choose the third option because this person needs to work with different teams and they need to collaborate with people. So I choose that one. And you'll see as we go along, the profile is now starting to form. And then the last question, do I want this person to have drive, self-esteem, aggression, assertion, or do I want them to be more moderate, conservative, and hesitant? So I'm more inclined to choose the first one. So now we have the profile. So this is the job profile that we've created. So it's compliance, influence, and dominance at the top, and we have steadiness at the bottom. So basically, I want this person to be confident, persuasive, compliant, following policies and procedures, direct and results orientated, and I want them to be quite active and restless and be comfortable with multitasking. A lot of our clients actually use this little paragraph at the end and they add it to their job advert or in their job description. So that's something that you could use. And now that I'm happy with my job profile, I can then take the job profile and match it to all of the candidates that have done their PPAs. So what it does is it gives you a star rating on who your top performers are and basically people that you might have to have a second interview with or follow up a little bit more on. So it starts from 1 to 5 stars. So if the candidate gets a 5-star match with their PPA to the job profile, that means they are a perfect match to the job. So if it's a 3 or 4 star, it's a good match. The 1 and 2 stars, then maybe I need to probe more or do a few more assessments or maybe speak to the candidate a bit more and probe in terms of my interview questions. So there's different ways that you could obviously use the PPA and match it to the job profile. So that just gives you an indication of how we do job profiling at Thomas. So now we're going to go back to the presentation. Okay, so now that we've created the job profile, we're now going to move into how to retain your talent. Okay, so with retaining your talent is basically how do you keep the talent that you now have in your organization and the person that you have recruited. So I just want to check, I think not sharing correctly. Okay. So we look at the looking at the potential of the new generation. So when retaining candidates, we have to look at with the new launch of there's millennials, there's Gen Z that we now have to deal with. So we basically have to look at this new world where we're recruiting millennials and we're recruiting Gen Zs. So with millennials, they tend to prefer the experience. They're focusing on development opportunities. They're looking at clear progression in terms of their job and their career. They're looking at coaching opportunities, and they're looking at the freedom to build their own career. Okay. Whereas your Gen Zs, they struggle to trust organizations. So it's up to the organization to build that trust with them and to get them on board because they value community. They're looking at the version of what is authentic, what is real, and they're looking at how to develop themselves and understand themselves as people and as individuals. So in terms of our recruitment processes and our recruitment strategy, we have to now change that, and we have to alter it, and we have to adapt it to the millennials and the Gen Zs that are coming through in terms of when they apply to the jobs in our organizations. And so how do you keep your talent? How do you take someone from their first day in your business and set them up to be a future leader? How will you keep them engaged and retain them? So there'll always be that risk that your most talented people will leave the organization because other organizations obviously notice their high potential as well. So keeping employee engagement high is a huge competitive advantage for you in terms of your retention strategy. And measuring potential allows you to identify high flyers early in the organization and create bespoke development plans for them. So looking at who in your organization is performing well, who has the talent and the potential, identifying that potential and working on it and creating a specific and personalized development plan for that specific person. And using psychometrics in that process just helps you get started on that much faster. And just makes creating a development plan much easier and a smoother process. There are 5 proactive ways to retain your employees that I have here for you. So ask yourself, are the right people in the right roles? So are you putting the right person in the position? Have you assessed them correctly? Do their behavioral traits match what you're looking for in terms of the position and the requirements for the role? And in terms of everything that we discussed with emotional intelligence and HPTI and the aptitude levels, do they match the requirements of the position? Review your team dynamics. Oh, sorry. So look at, is this person going to fit into the team? If there is any conflict within the team, how do you deal with that conflict? How are you going to manage it? How are you going to preempt future conflict? And basically, how is this person going to fit in that team? Are they going to connect with the people in the team? All of that is important in terms of creating a successful team dynamic. Recognize and adapt to different employee motivations. So everybody is motivated in a different way. It's important to recognize and identify how is that specific person motivated and structure your process and your retention strategy around that. Because we all motivated differently. It's just about identifying it and nailing into what exactly drives this person and how as an organization can we provide the things that drive them. Support your line managers with people assessments. So providing your line managers with proper information as a basis and data and statistics and information that's comprehensive will just enable them to basically support their employees better, to support their team better, and to manage their staff more effectively. And give employees the chance to feedback. So allow your employees to have that open communication. Give them the opportunity to have that open line of feedback, to voice their opinion. The more voice that they have in the organization, the higher the engagement is, and the more chance of you retaining that employee in the organization. And now just to recap the day, we just have some 8 best practice points for you for recruitment. So it's important to regularly review your processes. As we saw, especially with recruiting millennials and Gen Zs now, we need to constantly evolve, check our processes, alter them, make small tweaks here and there. So we need to be comfortable with that process and continuously be innovative and creative in terms of how we do it and how we adjust it and how we review it. The second one is ensure you have multiple opportunities to observe a candidate's potential. And obviously we can do this through assessments, assigning them to different types of projects because it's giving the opportunity to identify exactly where their potential lies. And then the awareness of bias. So candidates should have, all of them should have the same opportunities, and then consider diversity when recruiting. So the more diverse your team, the more different types of skill sets, the different types of behaviors, the different types of personalities that you have within a team, the more innovative and the more creative work you're going to obtain from that team. And then assessment feedback. So it should be offered to all candidates who have completed assessments as far as possible. I know it is a cost element for some organizations, With Thomas International, we do offer candidate reports, which can be sent to the candidate without having to give them a formal feedback session. So you do have that option within the organization to do that. So it's always nice to give them feedback, give them closure, allow them to ask you questions on the results as well. Involve key stakeholders in the hiring process. So make sure that when you are hiring somebody, that when you're creating the job profile, you do involve the line manager, you do involve key decision makers, so everybody is on the same page, and you have more input in terms of the information. Ensure that you have at least 2 candidates for a vacancy to allow for comparison. That always just helps the process as well. And be quick. Don't lose out on talent. It will also give you a positive impression if you are efficient during the recruitment process. And that always links back to the branding and how your organization is represented to the outside world and to the people applying to the positions in your organization. So those are just some nice tips for you. And that concludes the webinar for today. Thank you everybody for joining in. Really appreciate you participating. And please feel free to join any of our next webinar sessions that we're having over the next few weeks. If you haven't signed up, please sign up soon. And looking forward to engaging with you in the future. But thank you so much. Over to you, Candice.
Thank you so much, Larissa. That was such an insightful session. I'm now going to open up the chat box. If you've got any questions, you are welcome to pop them in there. I see we have a few questions already. And the first one we've got for you, Larissa, is who are the best people to involve when you're creating a job profile?
So it's always good to involve the line manager or even the person that's currently in the position. So it's also nice to get a bit of their input, especially if they're quite successful in their position. Then you want to have a bit of input from them in terms of what they think the role should look like. So yeah, it's good to have them as part of the process as well. And also key decision makers, so your CEO, MD, your top line managers, but those also would be quite beneficial if you could include them in the process as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Larissa. The second one is how often should you redo that job profile?
So the PPA, the actual PPA assessment can be done every 6 months. So you can relook at the job profile in the same way. You can adjust it and tweak it every 6 months or maybe every 12 months to just make sure that it's still consistent, it's still feasible, and it's still viable for the position, and if it's actually working for the position. So yeah, I would say 6 to 12 months would be a good time frame to redo a job profile.
Awesome. Thanks, Larissa. The next question we've got is, and I think this is the last one that we've got time for today, is if you have already compared your candidates to their job profile, and your most suitable candidate in terms of experience and qualifications and overall suitability for the role only has a 1-star rating, what is the best way to go about that?
So it's always important to look at the candidate holistically. So if the experience is there, if the education is there, qualifications, everything, and they've done the PPA and now it's a 1-star rating, then we have the interview guide, which gives us some questions that we can then probe for the candidate. We obviously don't reject them just based on a psychometric assessment. We can't do that. So it's unethical. So best practice is talk to the candidate, use the probing questions that the report provides you with. And then also maybe looking at the role, do another psychometric assessment. So maybe run an emotional intelligence assessment or look at running an aptitude test. And that can give us a little bit more of a comprehensive and detailed insight into the candidate. And if they have scored a 1-star rating on the job profile, then how can we support them? What do they need coaching and development on? It gives us an indication into that.
Okay, that's a great recommendation. Thank you, Larissa. I see here's one more question that's come in now that we'll quickly address. And the question is, if we only have a small budget, which assessment should I choose and in what step of the process? So in other words, only assess the last candidate or how would they go about that?
If budget is an issue, and obviously we can't assess every single candidate that has applied, so I would say take your top 2 candidates or your top 3 candidates, whatever your budget allows. And then depending on the position, And we always look at what is the purpose for the assessment? Why do you want to do the assessment? What information are we trying to gather? So if, for example, I am recruiting a finance manager, then I would maybe want to do a PPA to look at his behavioral style. And then I'd maybe want to do an emotional intelligence assessment. So maybe I'll just do 2 assessments. Because he's in a management position, I want to look at the emotional intelligence levels because I want to see how he engages with people and whether he has that level of self-awareness. So it's always important to go back to why are we doing the assessments? What is the type of information you're looking for? Yeah, so you could just maybe do those 2, especially if you have budget constraints.
That's a great recommendation. Thank you, Larissa. And we've got the final question, and a very popular one, I think, one that's quite difficult to answer.
Yeah.
How can a job hopper be identified?
That's a tough one. So we have noticed that when we run the general intelligence assessment, which is our aptitude test, people that score very high, score very well on that specific assessment, they tend to get bored very easily because they like to be challenged, and they need variety in their job. So it's always important to maybe do a general intelligence assessment at the beginning so you can identify, okay, this person, I need to keep them challenged, I need to keep them motivated, and it's almost a preventative stance where you're trying to prevent them hopping to another job that excites them a bit more. And as I mentioned in the webinar, it's so important to keep your employees motivated and look for what exactly motivates them. And that will, hopefully prevent them from job hopping.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Larissa. And thank you for the awesome webinar session. That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for attending, and thank you for your insightful and thought-provoking questions. We look forward to having you back next week. Enjoy the rest of your day.